A rusted steel arch sitting on 6 mud-caked tires, parked in a snow-covered Alaskan forest at 40 below. Wood smoke coming off the chimney, no mortgage statement in the mailbox, no file in the assessor's office. The arch kit costs $9,800. The finished rig, with chassis, axles, insulation, and a stove, runs considerably more, and this video prices every piece of it. What it is escaping is real. A home in an organized Alaska borough at 10 to 12 mills generates thousands of dollars a year in property tax. Every year. Forever. Whether the land is producing anything or not. But 2 separate legal mechanisms make this work, and nearly every video on this subject treats them as one thing. They are not. Confusing them is exactly how a man ends up with an assessment he never saw coming. That is where we finish. Start with the machine. Start with what actually arrives, because the number in the title is real, and it is also incomplete. $9,800 buys an arch kit, corrugated steel panels pre-punched at the factory, bolts, an assembly manual, and a set of state-stamped engineered blueprints. Across the market, these kits run $6 to $20 per square foot, depending on model, gauge, and supplier. That is a genuine price for a genuine product, and it is the cheapest part of this build by a wide margin. Here is what it does not buy. It does not buy the chassis. A mobile build needs a heavy welded steel frame with axles and 6 or more all-terrain tires to spread the weight across soft ground and snow-covered terrain. The arch panels bolt or rivet to that frame, and the frame is welded to the chassis. That is fabrication work, with real material cost behind it. It also does not buy closed-cell foam, interior sheathing, a wood stove and chimney, solar panels, a battery bank, water tanks, or a composting head. Count the whole thing honestly, and a self-built rig lands somewhere between $15,000 and $50,000, depending on size, materials, and how much of the welding you do with your own hands. Now set that against the alternative. Anchorage averages over $400,000, and a 30-year mortgage at that price pushes past $700,000 before the final payment clears. The math still wins decisively. It just does not win at $9,800. You are not buying a house for that number. You are buying the shell of one, and then becoming the general contractor of a vehicle. So why this shape, and not a box? The answer is 1,941 at a naval base at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, where the Navy needed a shelter it could ship anywhere on Earth, erect without heavy equipment, and trust to survive brutal conditions. Roughly 170,000 were built through 1,945 and sent to every theater of the war. The shape was not a style decision. It was the answer to a load problem. In a conventional pitched roof, weight travels down the rafters into a ridge beam, then into point-loaded columns. Every one of those transitions concentrates stress in a specific place, and a heavy snow load finds those places. Under enough weight, a flat or shallow roof buckles at exactly the joint you would predict. An arch has no such joint. Load distributes continuously along the curve and drives outward into the base, where the structure is strongest and where the chassis frame is carrying it. Nothing concentrates. Nothing has a weak transition to find. The geometry pays a second time, and this one matters at 40 below. An arch encloses a given volume with less surface area than a rectangle does. Less skin means less area for cold to cross before you have installed a single inch of insulation. The shape is already working in your favor. One piece of fine print worth knowing now rather than later. Arches are quoted in standard 2-2 gauge steel, and the manufacturers state plainly that this may not meet your snow and wind load requirements. Heavier gauge is available and the price rises accordingly. That is the machine. Now the legal question everyone actually clicked on. American property law splits everything into two categories, and which one your home falls into determines whether you get an annual bill. Real property is land and anything permanently affixed to it, a structure on a permanent foundation tied to a parcel recorded in the assessor's office, assessed annually, and taxed on its value. That is the category most homes live in, and it is the category that generates the bill arriving every year for the rest of your life. Personal property is everything else, movable, titled rather than deeded, and a structure built on a welded chassis with axles and tires under it is, in practice, a vehicle. That reclassification is real. It is not a trick somebody's lawyer invented recently. It is how the categories were drawn from the beginning. But here is the honest version of what crossing that line actually does, and this is where most videos on this subject overstate their case. You do not stop paying, you pay differently. Registration, title, vehicle-related costs. What you shed is the annual ad valorem assessment on a structure which is a genuinely different cost structure, not an exemption from cost. And the precision that matters most, especially in Alaska, boroughs can tax personal property. Alaska Statute 29.45.50 explicitly allows a borough to adjust its property tax structure by ordinance, including excluding personal property from taxation. Read that carefully. If excluding personal property requires an ordinance, then taxing it is the default that ordinance overrides. Which means the right question is never whether this is legal. It is what your specific borough's ordinance says. Call the assessor before you weld anything, and you will be making that call from inside a steel tube at 40 below, so let's talk about whether that is survivable. It is survivable, and the systems that make it survivable are not exotic. Heat comes from a wood stove. A properly installed stove in a well-insulated space of roughly 300 square feet holds livable temperatures at 40 below on a surprisingly modest fuel load. The chimney pipe exiting the curved roof is not decoration, it is the entire heating plant. The load-bearing word in that sentence is insulated. Raw corrugated steel conducts cold with brutal efficiency, and an uninsulated arch is a refrigerator you live inside. The interior gets closed-cell spray foam or rigid board pressed against the panels, then sheathing or paneling over that. Done correctly, the assembly rivals a well-built conventional home. Then the part that quietly destroys these builds. Condensation. Warm interior air meets cold steel and moisture forms inside the cavity where you cannot see it. Ignore vapor barriers and controlled ventilation, and your insulation is saturated and rotting within a single season. Handle it properly, and the structure stays dry and sound for decades. This is not an optional refinement in a metal building. It is the difference between a home and a slow failure. Power typically comes from 3 sources in combination. Solar panels mounted on the flat-end walls where they can face south. A propane generator for the dark months when solar production collapses. A battery bank tying the two together. Satellite broadband changed the economics of this life more than any other single development. Remote no longer means economically marginal. A man on a remote site can run a business from it. Water is hauled and stored in high-capacity tanks with snowmelt and filtration as winter backup. A composting head eliminates septic entirely, which in permafrost terrain is often either illegal or ruinously expensive. The rig works. So where are you legally allowed to put it? Start with the federal picture, because it is enormous. The Bureau of Land Management administers over 72 million acres in Alaska, and unlike federal land in the lower 48, vast stretches of it are genuinely remote and genuinely accessible. Now the rule people quote constantly and get wrong. Call it 142825, codified under 43. CFR Part 8360. You may camp up to 14 days within any 2 8-day period. After that, you must move at least 25 miles from your original spot. Here is the trap. That 2 5-mile radius is the area. Moving 10 or 15 miles down the road resets absolutely nothing. You are still inside the original zone and still bound by the original clock. The only way to start a fresh 14 days is to travel outside that radius or wait out the full 2 8-day window. A lot of people believe they can shuffle a few miles and begin again. They cannot. And BLM states its intent plainly. Dispersed camping is for short-term recreation, not long-term living. But now, the Alaska-specific detail that justifies this entire video. BLM prohibits leaving personal property unattended on public land for more than 10 days, except in Alaska, where the limit is 12 months. Alaska is specifically named as running a different standard from the rest of the country, 12 months versus 10 days. That single line is why this way of living is materially more viable in Alaska than anywhere else in the United States. Beyond BLM, there are millions of acres of state-managed land with their own access and camping provisions, and in rural areas, landowners are frequently indifferent to a quiet neighbor parked at the edge of a property for a season. Which brings us to the second mechanism, the one doing most of the work. Here is what almost nobody separates properly. The wheels are only half the story, and in Alaska they may well be the smaller half. Alaska is the only state in the country with no statewide property tax at all. No state mill rate, no central assessor, no state-level collection of any kind. Property tax in Alaska is entirely a borough and municipality affair. And the unorganized borough, roughly 57% of Alaska's land area, holding about 13% of its population, levies no property tax whatsoever. Inside that territory, only certain incorporated cities collect anything. Bethel, Cordova, Dillingham, Nome, Sitka, Unalaska, Valdez, a handful of others. Step outside those city limits, and there is no bill to reduce, no exemption to apply for, and nothing for your wheels to save you from. A neighbor with a poured foundation and a deeded parcel pays exactly what you pay, which is nothing. Now run it the other direction, because this is where people get hurt. Roll that same rig into Anchorage, Fairbanks, North Star, or Mat-Su, where mill rates run around 10 to 12 and effective rates land near 1% of assessed value. Geography is no longer protecting you, not even slightly. You are relying entirely on classification on a local ordinance you have probably never read, in a borough that is permitted to tax personal property unless it has specifically chosen not to. Two mechanisms, completely independent of each other. One is about what you built. The other is about where you stopped. The wheels change what you own. The map changes whether anyone is collecting. Know which one is actually protecting you, because they do not cover the same ground. And neither of them covers the 4 problems coming next. Breakup comes first, because it is the one that catches people who planned everything else correctly. Spring in Alaska thaws the ground and softens the roads, and the state responds with seasonal weight restrictions. A heavily loaded rig can be legally prohibited from certain roads for weeks, which means your spring position is not a preference, it is a commitment. park badly in March, and you may be staying there through May, under whatever authority governs that ground, whether or not your 14 days have run out. Insurance is genuinely unresolved territory. These structures are too large and too unconventional to insure easily as RVs, and they are not fixed structures that a homeowner's policy covers. Some men operating these builds carry nothing at all, accepting that the replacement cost of a self-built rig is a loss they could absorb. Others find specialty insurers writing policies for unconventional mobile dwellings at premiums well above standard RV rates. Neither of those is a good answer. Both are real, and the cost belongs in your calculation. Square footage is the third, and it is not a romantic constraint. 200 to 400 square feet works for someone who has deliberately reorganized his relationship to possessions and spends most of his waking hours outside. It does not work automatically. Men who attempt this without doing that reorganization first are claustrophobic and beaten within months. And remote service is the invisible tax. When something breaks, the nearest qualified person may be 4 hours away, and the part may not exist within a day's drive. This life demands real mechanical competence, deep spares, and enough redundancy that one failure never cascades into a survival problem. One page. Here is the whole thing on one page. What it costs. $9,800 for the arch and $15,000 to $50,000 for the finished rig with chassis, insulation, stove, power, and water. The steel is the cheap part, what it escapes, an annual assessment on a structure, what replaces it, registration, title, and vehicle costs. That is a different cost structure, not the absence of one, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling something. What actually protects you? Two independent mechanisms: classification, what you built and how it is titled; geography, where you stopped and whether anyone there collects. Most people understand one of those and assume it covers both. And here is the verdict, worded exactly. This is not a loophole somebody discovered. It is two entirely ordinary features of American law sitting next to each other, a classification line that has existed since the beginning, and a state that simply never built a statewide property tax in the one place on this continent, where the land is empty enough and cheap enough to use both at once. That is not outlaw behavior. That is reading the map and the ordinance more carefully than the man standing next to you. But I will not end this video pretending I can tell you how it lands where you are. Nobody on the internet can, including me. Your borough assessor can, and that call is free. 2 answers in the comments, and be specific. First, is your plan geography or classification? Say which, because they protect against completely different things, and knowing which one you are relying on is the entire game. Second, before you weld a single bracket, call the borough assessor and ask how they classify a titled structure on a chassis. Post what they tell you. That answer is worth more than any build video, including this one. I read every comment, and I answer build questions personally. We cover alternative builds every week here. Real costs, real timelines, what works and what does not. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you on the next build.